This is Irreversible Damage, Chapter 4, subtitled The Schools. Before I get into it, I also wanted to say I never know how to react to it. I'm just like, I'm happy that I've reached 400 subscribers now, and that, I don't know, that's, yeah, thank you. So this chapter, the schools, chapter 4, the main theme is anti-bullying in the name of safety and protection for homosexual and trans-identified students. And the number one method of preventing bullying from other students to the vulnerable kids is to just do a blanket education of what trans and homosexuality is, but it's mostly transgender. From at least that's what Abigail said in the book. That's what it seems to be. Like on the surface, on like, the statement of probably what they were trying to, open up with at the school district meetings or whatever of the state or something. I'm sure like the thesis or whatever was like, hey, let's teach kids about homosexuality and uh, different expressions of gender and stuff. And I totally get that. Like, I think that schools should definitely, like, all schools should be teaching other kids about homosexuality, because, like, you can't trust that parents are going to teach their kids about homosexuality and stuff, and like, oh, some people are just, just a little different, and that's okay. Like, you can't trust parents to do that, because just some of them just won't believe in it, because maybe they're Christian, I guess, or Muslim or something, or something that just makes them, anti-homosexual or something like that. So it makes sense to me that a school would be like, hey, let's educate these people and like, get an understanding of who your classmates pretty much are. I mean, for me personally, it would have been nice to have, like, there weren't really any obvious bullies in my school when I was growing up, but it would have been nice to have other kids be exposed to and understand that there are other kids that just don't fit into the stereotypical, traditional gender roles, and then other people aren't all heterosexual. That would have been nice, because like, not only would I not have been like a little bullied a little bit, but also one of my really close friends, he wouldn't have been bullied for being gay. Like, I mean, it would have been definitely nice. So I'm totally like, that's good. Abigail in the book defends the sentiment of uh, these types of kids being protected. And I'll get into what she says toward the end of this video, but uh, she acknowledges that transgender identified students are more vulnerable than non-trans identified students. She also doesn't doubt that legislature who pass anti-bullying laws are genuinely concerned for the physical and mental safety of particularly vulnerable students. And, from what I've heard from other schools and from my own as well, schools have always just had this bad reputation for just kind of being careless and kind of shitty, to be frank. Like, they didn't help me much for some things. Like, oh, you're a trouble student? Yeah, well, just go away. We don't want you. Stuff like that. They don't seem to really care that much. So it is nice to see that they're actually kind of stepping up their game, although it's a little extreme in my opinion, and in Abigail's opinion as well. Abigail makes a clear distinction between normal humane protection and excessive measures to remedy bullying, which, yes, I'm going to get into the excessive bullying first. They don't just teach the kids sexuality, gender identity, gender expression. They don't just go over that. They ask leading questions like, Are you entirely female? Are you sure you are? Like, what kind of question is that? Alongside that, there's exhorting prompt. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Exhorting uh, prompts like, I want you to imagine that you're a different gender. And I emphasize that it is exhortation because if the student fails the prompt, the teacher presses them further, saying, what would be different in your life if you were a different gender? How would you feel to be another gender? What would be fun about being another gender? What things in your life would not change if you were another gender? Like, ah, how many times can you say gender, kids? Yeah, it's too many times. Um, like at first glance, I can see like, okay, maybe this is just an exercise in empathy, since when have schools ever taught that? But whatever. Like on that basis, I could be like, okay, yeah, sure. Especially if there is like an actual kid with child onset gender dysphoria, and there's like this, this GNC kid coming in. And it would be kind of nice to have, the school board being like, okay, why don't we, like, get everybody situated with this person instead of like, oh, well, let's just ignore them and, let the other kids, like, kind of maybe bully them. I don't know. I don't care. I'm a teacher. I'm not paid enough for this. I don't believe that it's an exercise in empathy because teachers, as it said in the book, teachers will reject sexual dimorphism outright and appear pleasantly surprised when a kid chooses wisely, whatever that means, something other than cis. And then it kind of made me think, like, what happens to kids if they do identify with their biological sex? It's like way more suspicious and questionable, the motives of the school board, because parents are totally barred from knowing what's going on and what they're teaching the children. And it has to do with, like, I'd have to recheck the book. I might just like quote it here. It's saying like under the FARPA Act, I guess, because it's basically something where the students have safety and privacy within the schools. On one hand, I can see why the the school boards are like, okay, maybe we should keep this kind of information away from the parents, because parents can kind of sabotage some stuff. I've definitely seen it with like preschoolers, especially where I live, and and then kindergartens as well. Like the parents will just be like, no, you can't do this. Oh my god, you did this harmless thing to my kid. I'm gonna sue you. Like there's always like a lawsuit that gets pulled out of someone's ass because they didn't like one thing. So I can understand a little bit why they're like, okay, we're just gonna use this act, FARPA, I guess, and protect the students. Okay, like, okay, maybe. But when it comes to this subject in particular, especially depending on the relationship that was pre-existing, like, I feel like once the kid learns about, not so much the sexualities, but more so the gender identities and stuff, like, I feel like once they learn about it and they're considering that maybe this is something that they have, like, I feel like that would, like, whether or not it's actually true, like if they are like really trans or whatever, it's like I feel like that would estrange the kid from their parent, and they would want to keep more information away from them. And I just don't see how that's a good idea, because like a lot of people value family, so I feel like that kind of certain information like that is just, I don't know, it just feels wrong, like morally wrong. I don't know if this would really work, but I feel like, what if instead of keeping things private and away from the parents, between the students and their parents, like, why not have some kind of seminar or something and be like, uh like maybe teach parents about this sort of stuff so that maybe the parents can be on board with it too. And I feel like that would be a little bit better because at least the parents can consent to that kind of curriculum, you know? I don't like secrecy, especially when you're in a public school dealing with other people's kids. Secrecy just makes it seem like you're doing something heinous and sketchy as hell. So, like, I'm not for that. When it comes to, like, you know, what the school is actually teaching these kids, that's where I'm like, I don't think something like this, you shouldn't be teaching kids these types of things because, like I said, with the leading questions and the exhortation of gender identity, let's explore what you have, blah, 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 what do you feel on the inside, yada, yada, yada. Like, it feels as if like those kinds of things, not forcing them, that it seems like they're like leading the kids to believe that they're the opposite sex or just anywhere under the trans umbrella where medical intervention is an option. Like, I'm not saying trans stuff inevitably leads to medical stuff, but a lot of kids who think that it's like a very viable option for them, they might opt for it. And then I'm trying to think about like what would happen if that kid is like, oh yeah, like let's say a little girl, she's like, oh, I want to be, or I think I am a guy, so, and then they reach high school. And then they're like, okay, I want to start like medically transitioning, or sometimes even as young as 12, they'll start transitioning. What if they get onto the medical stuff, hormones, or having something that, you know, removes their reproductive organs in some way, you know, like a hysterectomy or, you know, removing one's testicles and stuff, like, then you would have to be relying on insurance and medical stuff. But it's like, what if that student just so happens to grow into an adult and then they get really unlucky with, you know, the economy going on, and then they struggle with getting a job that, or a job in general, or like a job that has benefits of insurance. Like, what if they can't get that, you know? Like, then they've kind of fucked themselves over, right? I mean, maybe somebody has a solution to that, but it just seems too sketchy to me. Transitioning is not easy. And it, like, I feel like the schools are making it seem like it's as simple and as inexpensive as a haircut when it just isn't. I'm getting this impression, it doesn't say it in the book, but I'm getting this impression that once they teach these kids all this gender identity stuff, nothing practical is being learned about it. They just teach about the existence of all these gender identities and stuff. They don't seem to teach anything practical. That way they can actually do something uh, non-regrettable in their future. It just seems really reckless and irresponsible so far. I mean, in this chapter, when I said you know, prompting and stuff again, like they're not forcing the kids. No, of course. Although when you say, you know, oh, well, we're not forcing the kids to be doing any of this stuff. They simply get to choose. It just kind of reminds you of like wet floor signs. Like, yeah, I might say wet floor sign, but somebody slipped on it anyway. It's not our responsibility. We put the sign up. You should have read it. You know, it's just kind of like, ugh. How to get away from responsibility 101. They'll say, what kids require then is the gender vocabulary to enable them to pick out their own point on the spectrum, is what is quoted in the book, and that's what apparently they would say. So it's like, we're going to teach them these things so that in the future, when they inevitably, in parentheses, inevitably get into their identity crisis, they'll have uh, how do you pronounce it? A smorgasbord of gender identities to choose from, and you get to choose from that bag of smorgasbord, gender identities, and go, oh, the school like really set me up for or not for failure, but for success. Wow, that's so great. I'm actually this. Thanks, school. Knowing that the trans identified people are like 1% of the entire population, at least in the US, it's like if we've had a history, uh, a diverse history of people not having gender identity crisis, I like it kind of sounds more like if there's going to be an identity crisis with these people when they grow up, it's likely going to happen because they were kind of taught these things. And now that they're overwhelmed with so many options, like, I feel like you're making them have an identity crisis. So, like, on that front, I'm like, I don't think I can agree with what, what they're proposing. Or I guess my compromise, I suppose, would be something like middle school, you should teach them about different types of sexualities. Also, like, keep on teaching them about it in high school, too. And then, and I don't think we need to say anything about, here's your options of gender identity. Just go with gender nonconformity instead. Like, yeah, some girls like to be are just naturally tomboyish. Some boys are just naturally kind of effeminate. And then if you have those simple terms and the kids are aware that you don't have to express yourself in a certain gendered way, I feel like that would make kids a little bit more, their quality of life in school would be just a tiny bit better, because then the tomboys would be accepted and the femboys would be more likely accepted. I know that they're not doing this because, according to Schools in Transition, they point out that schools unknowingly teach gender traditional gender stereotypes, which limits everyone's potential. That's what it says in the book. It says they're trans, but the irony that I noticed while reading this book is that they're the ones teaching and enforcing stereotypes anyway, because according to the California Healthy Youth Act, it's essential that any female student, learns gender stereotypes, because without them, gender identity makes no sense at all. And like, like what? How could you say that and then in like the same breath say, "Oh, but schools have unknowingly taught kids gender stereotypes"? I know that a lot of people, in the trans community, and even like kind of outside of it too, they'll say that like gender is a social construct. And running with their argument on that, I would say if gender is a social construct and people made up gender stereotypes, then what's the point in gender identity? And then also teaching it. So it just kind of sounds like they know it's made up cultural stuff, but then subsequently they'll be like, rejecting sexual dimorphism. And several months ago, I was like thinking about stereotypes, and I was trying to like argue in my head how stereotypes really work and stuff, and trying to think like, oh, this is what girls do and this is what boys do, and then but then I started imagining like, I've known a ton of girls in my school who were totally into sports, and that's technically masculine, right? Sports are masculine. And I've also seen girls who are into, or women who are into like football, like not just playing it, but also watching it as well. Watching it with the boys with a cold one, stuff like that. And then I'll also think about like boys who are into, dress up and stuff. Like it's just not exclusive. Like, that being said, like I know that the stereotypes come from, they're one part cultural and another part based on uh, behaviors exhibited from sex chromosomes and the sex hormones. So it's not completely uh, just cultural stuff. Yeah, so I guess moving on a little bit with all this LGBTQ education, as she expresses in the book, it's like be it kind of sets up kids to want to be under this trans and gay umbrella. It's like it's way cooler to be within the acronym rather than without it because, like being outside of it is kind of dull and like basic, like being cisgender and being a heterosexual person is just boring. There's nothing quite unique about it. It makes those kids who fit into it, regardless whether or not they're truly trans or true, like I don't know how many kids fake being homosexual, but like maybe it's regardless of the authenticity of being actually underneath that umbrella, because maybe they're actually like when they grow up, especially, and then grow out of certain things, maybe they are just cis het, a cis het, They are going to be celebrated, especially with, like I said earlier when I was quoting that teachers will be pleasantly surprised when the kid comes up to them and says, "I'm XYZ gender," and they'll be like, "Oh, good boy, good job, Timmy. What do you go by now?" When you have the students who don't fit into that, and maybe they are the cishet scums, like they're gonna feel inadequate, and they're never like no matter what they do, they're not gonna be impressive toward the teachers, because like I've seen this my entire school life, where in middle school, uh, grade school and middle school, uh, my school had like this. I don't really know why, because it was just one thing. Why didn't they cover more? But what they did was they would like celebrate disabled kids. And whenever a disabled kid would do something, like they just did something that seemed out of the norm of their bubble. And so the teacher would be like, "Oh my God, look at her or him. She's done this." And, I'm saying like they could have also done, gender non-conforming kids like myself, and one of my uh, bisexual and gay friends, like we were just kind of left in the dust, and also the kids who were just generally able-bodied, we were also all left in the dust. So on that front, it was just like we weren't unique and special anymore for just doing something a little bit more exemplary, like and not having the proper attention just builds up resentment. And then on top of that, in high school, when we would have like a foreign exchange student, and we had like maybe two or three from what I saw, and the teacher would always, for some strange reason, like we were all American, uncultured, uh, ungrateful brats. That's kind of the feeling that I got from my teachers. And but then this person from like Fiji or France, they're here and they're so much better. They're so much more respectful, and they do this, that, and the other, and they're just so good. And whenever that foreign exchange student would just do anything, and it was pretty basic what they would do, and the teacher would be like, "Oh my God, this person is so good. They are so much better than the rest of my students. Oh, I love French kids, or Fijian kids. It's just like," and the rest of us are just kind of like, "Wow, geez." But then not only that, not just disabled and foreign kids, but also like if you were a girl too, the teacher would be celebrating your work if it was like a little bit more like exemplary, like it was kind of like above the average a little bit. And then the teacher would be like, "Oh my God, she did such a great job. Wow, look at her work." And then the boys would just get nothing. They would almost never get like, "Oh, wow, look what he did." And I know this because when I transitioned to being a guy, none of that stopped on its tracks. Just boom. I never got praise after I started transitioning. And I didn't notice at first because I just thought it was like, whatever. It's probably just, normal. But no. Looking back on it, for sure, I remember the teachers would do that to me. It'd be like, wow, her work is really good. And then when I transitioned to being a guy, teachers started to just not trust me anymore. They thought that I was like a ne'er-do-well, and they just there was always this like tension between me and my teachers, mostly the female teachers. And I never knew why. I just thought they were being really cruel and, and mean and nasty. But no, it's because they just don't like boys. Yeah. So anyway, like that kind of treatment of, oh, I like these are my favorite students now, and then the rest, it builds resentment. And I can see why, like, uh, that kind of behavior in schools today, you go on to like Tumblr, Reddit, Twitter, wherever else people like talk, talk to each other, no more like talk at each other. Like they'll always like the trans community will be like, oh, they're the sit het scumbags. They're so gross and disgusting and so bigoted and transphobic and blah blah blah. And then you have the the other people who were likely the unsavory and undesired kids. Like they look at the trans people and they're just like, oh, uh, you're not really trans, you're this, that, and the other, blah, blah, I don't believe you, blah, blah, I'm not going to respect your pronouns, yada, yada, yada. And so there's like this war and this divide. But I'm like now very certain that a large portion of it is because of resentment and differing treatment. Going back to the anti bullying stuff, on the anti bullying measures, what exactly constitute bullying is not like the traditional, like I don't know about you, but I totally grew up with movies and other sorts of media and like teachings and stuff where like a a student would be like viciously verbally abused by other students or physically abused by other students, which Abigail does have an example um, from a 1996 case in Ashland, Wisconsin, where a kid named Jamie Nabozny, I don't know, but he was like a very openly gay kid, and pretty much like everybody in the school just freaking beat him to bits because, because he's gay. The school didn't do jack shit for him. So that's usually what comes to mind when it comes to bullying, but in this case, bullying is not any of that stuff. It's it's just using the wrong pronouns, using the person's dead name, refusing to consider the trans-identified student as their preferred gender. That's bullying now. There's also spiritual bullying where a kid will say, "No, no, I'm Christian, so therefore, even if you claim you're a girl, you're not a girl to me because that's what God said." Blah 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 blah. Yeah. So that's what bullying is, which is very untraditional, and it's kind of perplexing to me. But it's considered bullying because uh, when it does come to the trans-identified students, they are a more vulnerable bunch, like I said before in the beginning of this video. Um, and sure, they might have a higher risk of self-harm and probably suicide ideation and stuff. And so it's considered bullying and violence when somebody, a parent, even like a parent or a peer or just somebody else, is misgenders them, and then it could very well just lead to their, you know, their untimely deaths. I know that's dark and I don't want to make light of it, but that's they want to avoid students killing themselves. I could see that being pretty persuasive in that meeting. When I was in school, I my mental health did go down to the point where I just like anytime somebody would consider me a girl or would call me by she, her, miss, you know, or saying my dead name, I would get super upset and I would allow it to ruin my day. Um, but when I look back on it, like, let's just say hypothetically, I still identified as trans. Like, I, I would have rather have overcome my sensitivity of being misgendered and somebody using my dead name. Because like I would rather have learned to be more confident in my identity and not let other people's words just destroy me, because that's not a way to live, to just be constantly like on guard if somebody's gonna misgender you or not. It's an extremely stressful state to be in. So it's better to learn and to teach these kids, like if you're going to be teaching them about uh LGBTQ stuff, then you have to, you have to give them the armor that goes along with it. You can't just you can't just say, here's your smorgasbord of identities. Once you graduate from college, you'll have no protection of it at all. So if somebody misgenders you out in the wild, like, well, good luck with that. Goodbye. It's not our responsibility anymore. You're an adult now. Goodbye. Uh, yeah, yeah, no. If you're teaching that stuff, you got to teach them how to have a backbone. Like, I don't like this whole like we're gonna teach you these things, and we're gonna try to punish the bullies. I don't see uh, strengthening the nation with this sort of teaching. I just see complete weakening of it. I don't like this whole approach of treating the kids as if they're just delicate creatures that are gonna just shrivel up at any particular word that they don't like. It reminds me of like Victorian era England and stuff. Like especially the higher class women. They were seen as very delicate and easily fainting. Um, they needed special treatment and not be exposed to offending stimuli. Otherwise, you know, bad stuff would happen. Talking from my own experience, and I feel like talking for some of these kids, like I would rather have been treated like I was capable of taking a hit rather than being completely incapable and looked at as weak. Pretty much Abigail's like solution to this is educators do not need to insist on imagine yourself as gay or transgender, or to imagine that you're a boy in a girl's body or vice versa, when what they should actually be doing is teaching kids to display decency, civility, kindness toward like all students. Treat every student equally uh, rather than propping one up rather than the other one. She says, follow the golden rule, stand up to bullies. Any singling out of others for their differences, physical, religious, sexual, or otherwise, should be met with neither indulgence nor toleration. Bad behavior should be met with swift punishment. She compares the promotion of LGBTQ stuff and the aims toward anti-bullying in a school to when like a Thai kid, that's what she said. Thai kid is a student within the school, and the entire school, in an act of preventing bullying, extensively educate all the students about Thai culture, religion, their philosophy, and the history of Thailand. It, it's unreasonable. Why cater to the 1%? when you could just treat everybody equally. There's a time and place for certain education, but you don't need to go that far, you know. So Abigail ends the chapter by stating, quote, "Children's welfare as defined by activists is not their priority. These bullies who know next to nothing about gender theory or queer theory are officious intermeddlers in school policy and teacher instruction," meaning that they care more about fending off bullies and ignorance rather than the welfare of the trans and homosexual kids themselves. So clearly, to me, Abigail is not being exclusionary. I always struggle with this word exclusionary, exclusive. Ah. She's clearly not. She's saying we do need to be anti-bully. Yeah, we do need to protect students, especially the vulnerable ones, but there's no point in teaching everybody about gender stuff. Well, like, what's the point of that? You can have trans students, yeah, but you don't need to teach everybody else about being trans and stuff. In conclusion to this chapter, I do agree with some of what California is doing. I just strongly disagree with the gender identity thing. Only way I would agree with, you know, identifying it as cis, I guess, but just kind of being away from their gender stereotypes and stuff. Because otherwise they'll just think, oh, well, I must be trans then, and there's no other alternative to this. As I see it now, California and Canadian schools are doing more harm than good with faulty science and denying follow-up studies that verify the opposite of the conclusions from the previous studies that they peddle uh, within the activism. Is it not enough that most kids just don't fall perfectly within gender roles that are largely subjective in nature anyway? Is it not enough that girls can be masculine while being girls and boys to be feminine while being boys? What do we have? Why do we have to label everything? Why do we have to encourage labeling things when they don't need labels? Those are my questions that I pose to this. Anyway, I need to get out of here. Bye.